Everybody joining me. First guest on the Southeast College Football Report is Chris Gordy. You can listen to him daily over on Locked On SEC, and he's also over at Sports Talk 790 in Houston. And Chris, a big fan of Locked On SEC, and I appreciate you taking the time and coming on the show.
Yeah, definitely, man. It's funny. This always feels like the slower time of year, because we just came out of football, but you got the NFL Combine, getting ready for the draft. You got SEC baseball, softball. The basketball just came to an end. We're about to head into the tournament. So it's just funny. People always like, oh, it's the dead time of year. This is a slow time of year. It's like, man, this is the busiest time of year.
Yeah, it's wild with transfer portal, all the NIL stuff. You talked about the combine, spring practices now. I mean, there's a handful of teams. SEC started last week, more starting this week. There used to be a time where there was a quote unquote off season in college football. There's not one now. I mean, there's constantly something going on. Maybe in June after the spring meetings it slows down, but maybe outside of that you don't really have that now.
Yeah, it's year round, and obviously, the portal's closed right now, but post spring ball, the portal will open up again, and I expect a lot more movement once again. Guys who lose starting jobs in the spring, or it's evident that they're not going to win jobs. I think we're going to see a lot more, guys enter the portal, and we'll see a lot more movement around the SEC.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Free agency in college football. Hey, the pro sports, they get it once. College football, we get it twice an off season with the portal and NFL draft combine. I always talked about it. Awesome updates throughout the weekend over on your Twitter account, and just keeping everybody updated and what's going on and who's doing what with the combine, and I liked what you called it, underwear Olympics. How much do you take away from what players do at the combine?
I think it's important. It's part of the evaluation, but I just, to me, I can't believe the number of people that just ignore or are coming out of the weekend of the combine and just ignoring film. I mean, Anthony Richardson, for anybody who watched the SEC and watched Florida football these last couple of years, you came away with a mixed opinion on Anthony Richardson. The fact that, man, sometimes he shows freak athleticism, tremendous plays, and other times you're like, dude, that was a simple crossing route on a 3rd and 4, and you threw it at the guy's ankles, and now you're punting. There was a lot of that at Florida, and it was frustrating. I got a friend who's a diehard Florida fan, and he said he was one of the most frustrating quarterbacks. So at least with Emory Jones, he could use his arms, he could use his legs, but Emory Jones was at least a little bit more of a consistent passer there. That's why Dan Mullen stuck with Emory over Anthony Richardson 2 years ago. And, Richardson finally got his chance this past year in the Billy Napier offense. But, man, like you see shades of brilliance in the second half of that Utah game, and then you see just bad quarterback play, like the second half of the Kentucky game. The Florida State game, his last college game, was just a weird game because he had 9 completions in that game. But the 9 completions were fantastic. Deep balls, hitting guys on the money, and then he had 18 incompletions. So it's just Anthony Richardson was one of the most frustrating guys. And so we come out of this weekend at the Combine where he just wows everybody, a 4.4 40 and, ridiculous vertical jump and broad jump and all this kind of stuff. And now people are going, man, I got Anthony Richardson as my number 1 quarterback. And I'm going, wait a minute. Like, sure, the upside looks tremendous, but are we going to ignore the 53% completion percentage last year? Like, the film has to matter. And that's what I tweeted out. Kevin O'Connell, the Vikings head coach, was doing an interview on the NFL Network. And his quote was, I believe wholeheartedly in the tape being the driving force of an evaluation. We cannot ignore what Anthony Richardson put on film last year. And by the same token, we can't ignore what Bryce Young put on film the past 2 years at Alabama, where he was one of the most productive quarterbacks in college football, obviously the Heisman winner 2 seasons ago. I thought this year he was still uber productive with, a worse offensive line that, probably the worst offensive line that Saban's had, at least in the past 5 years at Alabama, and that's saying something. No alpha receiver. That was the first time in over a decade I can remember Alabama not having an alpha, from Julio Jones to Calvin Ridley to Jameson Williams. I mean, every year they've always had a big dog receiver. This year they didn't have that. And so when you say it was one of the worst offensive lines they've had in the Saban era, one of the worst receiving corps you could say. That's to a certain standard correct. Bryce Young was phenomenal with what he was able to work with this past year. Because, I've heard so many people say, oh, look at the supporting cast he works with. It's 5 stars everywhere. Yeah, there's some, but this year was more a sign of Bryce Young's brilliance, and what he put on film was phenomenal. And I don't understand why we throw all that film out the window, all because Bryce Young's 5'10.5". You know what I mean? Like suddenly the measurement, somebody comes in and goes, oh, he's not 6 foot? Yeah, I'm dropping him. And it's like, well, okay, moron. How about you go watch the film at Alabama and then come back to me? I thought Mike Griffith, who covers Georgia, made a great point when we interviewed him last week. He said, look, people keep saying, oh, it's going to be different in the NFL. It's going to be different in the NFL. He goes, dude, the defensive front he faced against Georgia last year is bigger than that of some of NFL offensive linemen. They're not more talented, but like if your concern is, oh, he's not going to be able to get it over the big, strong defensive linemen in the NFL, okay, he just faced those guys at Georgia this past year. And again, people can argue, well, it's college versus the NFL. Yeah, but Trevon Walker, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, hey, guess what? All those guys first-round picks. They either played in the NFL this past year or a guy like Jalen Carter who's going to play in the NFL this coming year, going to be a first-round pick. So it's just frustrating to me. I have Bryce Young as the best quarterback in this draft. Is he a little undersized? Yes. I hate the comps people keep going to. Oh, he's Kyler Murray. He's not Kyler Murray, anything other than size. In fact, his hands are a little bit bigger than Kyler Murray. But Kyler Murray, so much in his early NFL career looked like a one-read and tuck it and run. Bryce is not looking to tuck it and run. Bryce is still a willing passer, looking to find his open receiver and wait back there in the pocket. So, again, should there be some concerns about Bryce Young's height and size? I guess. But to me, what he put on film and what he showed, I think he's going to be a tremendous quarterback at the next level. And again, I get the upside of maybe a Will Levis or an Anthony Richardson. But to me, Bryce Young is the guy that I would still go with.
Yeah, talk about that Kyler Murray comparison. I don't think you're ever going to put in Bryce Young's contract that if he doesn't study enough film or all that other stuff, that he doesn't get as much money. I don't feel like Bryce Young is that guy.
No, and everything we heard from him at the Combine, he wasn't doing any workouts, and I don't really understand the thinking behind it. Maybe his agent said, look, most people already have you as the number one quarterback on the board, so, maybe it would only hurt you if you went to the Combine through, so he's going to throw it his pro day here in a couple of weeks, but he did everything else. He did all the interviews, and he even did some film sessions with coaches, and I heard, they came away very impressed with him, and was a little bit in the realm of a Joe Burrow in terms of how much he likes to do film work and sit there and watch film and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, look, if people want to be stupid and pass on Bryce Young, somebody's going to wind up with a gem if he falls in this draft.
Yeah, I'm with you. I agree with you 100% on Bryce Young because he's a gamer. That when in the game, who cares about how tall he is, how big he is? He just showed in the big moments at Alabama. Like I said, this past year when he didn't have those receivers around him, that was what he was used to having the year before with with Mechie and James Williams, like you said. There was games. We look at everybody knocks Alabama for losing the 2 games they lost. How bad are they without Bryce Young? That's my big thing with them.
Yeah, I had Chris Doring on the show a few weeks ago, and he brought up the fact that Bryce Young never left the field this year with his team losing. Like, in other words, every game ended with him either he had just tied the game for his team or given his team the lead. Every game he left the field doing that for his team. The field goal, they give up against Tennessee, that's on the defense. The giving up the 2-point conversion at LSU, that's on the defense. So I just thought that was a phenomenal stat when I heard that Bryce Young never left the field at the end of a game this year with his team trailing. He always either gave them the lead or at least tied the game. And you can't ask for much more than that from your quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely not. So let's transition into, like I said, spring practice. 4 teams have started last week. Auburn, Florida, Missouri, and Vanderbilt have got going. Kentucky, Mississippi State, Arkansas, LSU are this week, recording this on a Monday for everybody if you listen to it later on in the week. But just for you, and I know this is a very vague, wide, broadening question, but for this spring in the SEC, what are some storylines or the storyline you're really going to be paying attention to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with the two big ones, the quarterback at Alabama and the quarterback at Georgia. I think, everybody expects Bama and Georgia to be two of the better teams again, coming into this year. And, it's not the favorites in the East and the West. So, what do those teams look like? We know that the rosters are loaded with talent all up and down the roster, but they lose Bryce Young, they lose Stetson Bennett. And so, who's more ready and equipped to have the next man step up. And, of course, at Georgia, they've got some great talent in Carson Beck and Brock Vandegrift and Gunnar Stockton. It's great young quarterbacks. Everything I've heard is that Carson Beck is probably going to be that guy that it's his turn and he's ready to shine. And from a talent standpoint, more gifted than a Stetson Bennett, has a bigger arm and has all the traits you want in an athlete. So, could Georgia get even better if Beck can hit the ground running? And at Alabama, it's going to be a really interesting one because Jalen Milroe was the guy who backed up Bryce Young last year and got in some action. But Ty Simpson, I've been told that he suits more what they want to do there, with the new OC coming in from Notre Dame and Tommy Rees. So I think that's going to be a fascinating one to watch because if you look around the rest of the SEC, everybody else kind of knows who their quarterback is for the most part. I mean, Kentucky brings in Devin Leary, the transfer from NC State. Of course, Tennessee with Joe Milton, who took over after Hendon Hooker got hurt. He looked phenomenal. Florida is, they bring in the transfer from Wisconsin, Graham Mertz. We'll see what he looks like. But, again, they kind of know who their guy is. South Carolina brings back Spencer Rattler. In the West, LSU brings back Jaden Daniels. Will Rogers is back at Mississippi State. Ole Miss didn't want to roll in with just Jackson Dart. They went out and got Spencer Sanders and Walker Howard through the portal. KJ Jefferson back at Arkansas. It sounds like it's going to be Robbie Ashford at Auburn. And then Texas A&M, Connor Wegman, really showed some nice signs later in the year as a true freshman. So it's fascinating that, possibly the two best teams in the SEC going into the season are the only two that don't know who, their quarterback is right now, and that's the most important position on the field. So those are kind of the two main storylines, and then just other pieces, like LSU brings back almost everybody on their offense, which is great, but they got a lot of retooling to do on their defense. They bring back Harold Perkins, who was phenomenal freshman linebacker, but that whole secondary had to be reworked, and they brought in transfers from Ohio State and Syracuse and all over the country to come in and try to retool. I think Arkansas, their offense with Dan Enos back in there, what's that going to look like with a seasoned guy like KJ Jefferson? I think Auburn is a fascinating story. I think Hugh Freeze can hit the ground running there. I've looked at Auburn. The schedule's it's not easy, but I think there's a good chance if everything goes right, Auburn could get to 8 wins this year and really start to get this thing back on with Hugh Freeze recruiting at a high level and all that. So those are just kind of some of the storylines. Florida, it's fascinating to me beyond just the quarterback, but that defense was so bad last year. And obviously they go out and get Austin Armstrong from that was going to Alabama to coach their linebackers, and Florida swoops in and steals him as a co-DC. So that defense has got to get better for Florida. I went back and looked, as much as I said Anthony Richardson was inconsistent, the offense wasn't the problem for Florida last year. It was the defense. They couldn't get stops. They couldn't get off the field. So if they can fix that, I think Florida can at least be a middle-of-the-pack team next year. Shane Beamer at South Carolina has done a fantastic job of taking a step forward every single year. If he gets the Spencer Rattler that played against Tennessee and Clemson down the backstretch of last season, if he could get that Spencer Rattler out of the gates to start the year, they're going to make some noise in the East next year. And then, of course, Milton, with Tennessee. And it's not just Milton at quarterback, but who are those other receivers? Well, Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt leaving. I know Squirrel White looked good at times, but it's not easy to replace a Cedar Tillman and a Jalen Hyatt. So, can Tennessee do that? So those are just kind of some of the broad ones. And then one other one to throw in, Mississippi State. I mentioned Will Rogers being the senior quarterback, but what's that offense look like without Mike Leach? Mm-hmm. And, of course, rest in peace to Mike Leach, an awful, awful storyline to finish last season. But, he didn't look great in the bowl game. That offense didn't look all that great. So, does Mississippi State become more of a defensive-minded team? Because that's where, their head coach, his bread and butter is going to be on that defense. So it's just going to be kind of funny to see if Mississippi State shifts from, this up-tempo team trying to score 30, 40, 50 points a game to suddenly more defensive-minded and playing some lower-scoring games. So that's going to be a fun one to watch as well.
But I told you I wanted to talk about some new assistant coaches and coaches in the conference, when I messaged you about coming on. And I just got one for you. So we've gone over 15 minutes. So I said it would be 15 minutes. As we are in spring, and this is what I'm interested in. I'd like to see how do you think this pair is going to work. The Jimbo Fisher-Bobby Petrino pairing. How do you see that work? Because this is obviously going a big spring, a big season next season for Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M after the obvious disappointing season. Haven't lived up to expectations there, but just what are your thoughts going into spring, into next season with that pairing with Jimbo Fisher and Bobby Petrino?
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw some people, as soon as the hire was made, said, "Oh man, this could be an absolute train wreck," and it could be. And if it is, it's going to be must-see TV because Jimbo is a type A personality, and Bobby Petrino's a type A personality, and they could butt heads. They could clash. Remember, Jimbo, the big push was to take play calling duties out of his hands and be more of a figurehead head coach. And I wonder, egos get in the way sometimes, and I wonder if Jimbo can check himself at the door and say, "No, I hired this OC, and I'm going to defer to him, and he's going to take over the full play calling duties and all that." We're going to find out real quick, but. On the flip side, I would counter and say maybe it will work. Bobby Petrino is still a pretty damn good play caller, and if I told you from this angle that this is going to be the best talent Petrino has ever had in his career, he's going to coach the most 5-stars he's ever had in his career, and you do it with Connor Wegman, who was a freshman last year, who got his legs under him and showed some good things, Evan Stewart, who was a fantastic freshman receiver a year ago, Moose Muhammad, who is an upperclassman receiver who really came on in that LSU game, and then a backfield that has a couple of more inexperienced talent in Amari Daniels and Le'Veon Moss, but they bring in a true freshman in Reuben Owens from the Houston area, who was a phenomenal high school running back. Who I've had several people tell me he could come in and start from day one and be their bell cow at running back. I think there's a good chance that this does work and that A&M gets back to showcasing their 5-star talent. They need to fix that offensive line. It was so inconsistent for them last year, but they bring back guys like Leighton Robinson and Ruben Fothery and guys who I think, with the right coaching can block well and perform well. So, as much as I would love to point and laugh at A&M and joke and say, man, what a train wreck that is. Good luck, finding that buyout money to fire Jimbo next offseason. I think there's a good chance that Petrino does work as a play caller, showcases that talent, and maybe they don't get to 10 wins this year, but certainly 9 wins is in play, and maybe A&M makes some noise. Keep in mind, they were on the doorstep of beating Alabama last year. They beat LSU, so as bad of a disaster of a season as it was for Jimbo, he still had some nice moments, and if they can just get that retooled and fixed, I think the Petrino hire could turn out to be a good one.
It's going to be interesting to watch, like I said, it's the spring, and then as we get to the fall and the season turns around, so it comes around, it's going to be interesting to see how those two do work together. And Chris, it's been a lot of fun having you on the show, talking Combine, Bryce Young, the storylines in the spring and all that good stuff. But if listeners want to check you out online, where can they find you, and where can they catch Locked On SEC?
Yeah, just search wherever you get your podcast, Locked On SEC. We're on Spotify and iTunes, and of course the video version is up on YouTube now. They actually have us streaming on a bunch of different news websites or like apps and stuff now. So yeah, anything you go to, just search Locked On SEC. You can find us there. Even just go to LockedOnSEC.com. It'll take you straight to the audio version of the show. And we're there 5 days a week talking all things SEC football, and we'll mix in some basketball, some baseball, softball along the way, but still about 90% football talk on a daily basis because, let's face it, SEC football is year-round, 365, and, man, we've got some big storylines coming with Texas and Oklahoma coming. What's the 9-game conference schedule going to look like, and so much more. So go check us out, Locked On SEC.
All right, sounds good, Chris. Once again, I appreciate the time, and I look forward to maybe talking to you again sometime down the road.
Definitely, man. Anytime.